It was supposed to be a love story, not the kind you read in fairy tales or see on Valentine's Day cards, but one written late in life after the heartbreaks, after the losses, after the years of growing old alone. Sandra Cruz was 58 years old, a widow, a mother of 3, and for most of her adult life, she had played by the rules. She hadn't always been alone, but Sandra had always known loneliness. Even when William, her late husband, was alive, there had been a kind of quiet distance between them, a marriage built more on duty than desire. He was a good man, dependable and disciplined, a local contractor who came home at 6, read the paper, and rarely spoke about feelings. He provided, he protected, but he never really saw her. In the early years, she tried candlelit dinners that he came home too late for, weekend getaways that turned into silent drives. After their 3rd child, something in her gave up. She stopped waiting for him to notice the new dress, the changed haircut, the fatigue in her voice. When William was diagnosed with cancer, Sandra nursed him faithfully. She was by his side through every appointment, every chemo session, every sleepless night. She buried her needs so deep, she forgot they even existed. And when he died, the house didn't feel emptier. It just felt honest. The silence was no longer masked by the sound of television or measured footsteps. It was raw and real. For the first time in years, she was truly alone with herself, her regrets, and the memories of a life that looked perfect from the outside. Her children checked in occasionally, holidays, birthdays, but they had their own lives. One lived in Miami, one in Orlando, and the youngest, Alex, was always too busy. Sandra understood that's what happens. Mothers raise then fade. Still, there were nights she'd sit on the porch with a glass of wine and wonder if anyone would ever look at her again like a woman, not a grandmother, not a retiree, not someone to be pitied. There was one man 5 years after William's death, a widower she met at a church potluck. They went out for coffee a few times, shared books, even talked about traveling. But one afternoon over lunch, he said, "You remind me so much of my late wife. You even cook like her." That was it for Sandra. She didn't want to be a memory replacement. After that, she stopped trying. Love, she decided, was a chapter already written, and she was too old to flip it back open until Joseph. She loved one man faithfully, raised her children with care, and grieved in silence when cancer stole her husband away. She didn't date. She didn't dream of second chances. She simply endured until the day a man, nearly 40 years her junior, walked in her life and said, "You deserve to be adored." His name was Joseph Turner, 24, handsome, sweet-talking, a bartender at a luxury resort who seemed to appear just when Sandra needed something, someone to believe in. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Within a month, they were engaged. In 3 months after the wedding, Joseph was gone. Not emotionally, not metaphorically. Gone. Gone. Vanished. He left the house one morning to go fishing off the coast of Miami and never returned. His boat was found floating, empty, his phone still in the cabin, the engine still running. The Coast Guard called it an accident, but Sandra's neighbors didn't buy it. Neither did her kids. And when the police started digging, literally and figuratively, what they found buried in the backyard would blow the lid off a story that no one saw coming. Because the truth wasn't just tragic. It was twisted, calculated, and possibly premeditated. This isn't a story about love. It's a story about manipulation, betrayal, and the kind of desperation that hides behind soft smiles and wedding vows. A woman searching for companionship. A young man chasing something more. And a family secret that would leave one man dead and another behind bars. Sandra Cruz wasn't looking for love. At 58, she had made peace with her solitude. A widow for nearly a decade, she filled her days with gardening, book clubs, and occasional visits from her 3 adult children. Her late husband William had left behind not just a sprawling home in Miami, Florida, but also a sizable inheritance. Life was quiet, predictable, until one weekend trip changed everything. It was a girl's getaway. Just her and 2 lifelong friends at a luxury resort in Fort Lauderdale. That's where she met Joseph Turner, or as everyone in the poolside bar called him, Joe. He was 24 years old, tanned, charming, with a confident ease that made people lean in when he talked. He poured her a mojito, flashed that easy smile, and said, "You've got the most peaceful eyes I've ever seen." Sandra laughed. She hadn't been flirted with like that in 20 years. What started as harmless banter turned into late-night walks on the beach, long conversations about dreams, regrets, and second chances. Joe didn't just make her feel attractive. He made her feel alive again. When she returned home to Miami, she couldn't stop thinking about him. And somehow, Joe kept showing up. First in texts, then surprise visits, even weekend getaways to the Keys. Within a month, he asked her to marry him. Age is just a number, he whispered, holding her hand. I've never felt this connected to someone. Her children were horrified. Her oldest daughter accused Joe of being a gold digger. Her son warned her she was being scammed. But Sandra stood firm. He sees me, she told them. Not my age, not my bank account. 2 weeks later, they got married under the big oak tree in her backyard. Just the two of them, an officiant, and a soft breeze that carried the scent of orange blossoms. Joe wore a light gray suit. Sandra wore ivory. She said it was the happiest day of her life. But happiness, it seemed, had a time limit. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Joe vanished. Sandra remembered it clearly. He had kissed her on the forehead, told her he'd be back before noon, and walked out the front door carrying his fishing gear. It was something he picked up recently, a new hobby, he called it. He said it helped him clear his mind. By sunset, he still hadn't returned. At first, Sandra assumed he'd lost track of time. But when his phone went straight to voicemail, and hours turned into darkness, panic began to set in. She called the local sheriff's office just after 9 p.m. Her voice trembling, she said, "My husband's missing. He went out fishing this morning and hasn't come home." The next day, Joe's boat was found drifting off the coast of Miami. The engine was idling. The anchor line snapped, and inside the small cabin were his cell phone, wallet, and sunglasses, but no Joe. Search crews combed the water for days. Helicopters, divers, volunteers. Nothing. To the outside world, it looked like a tragic accident. A young man lost at sea. One of those freak moments where the tide turns cruel, and a simple trip becomes a death sentence. News outlets picked it up. Local newlywed lost in boating mishap. Wife devastated. Sandra played the grieving widow again, but this time something didn't sit right. Not with her neighbors, not with her children, and certainly not with Alex, her youngest son. Alex had never liked Joe. From a moment his mother introduced the much younger man at a family barbecue, Alex felt something was off. Joe was too polished, too agreeable, too perfect. He looks at you like he's sizing you up, Alex once told his sister. Not like a man in love. And now, with Joe missing and no body found, Alex's instincts kicked into high gear. He started asking questions. Had anyone actually seen Joe at the marina that morning? Why hadn't the boat capsized if the waters were rough? And why was his phone, Joe's lifeline, left behind? Sandra, still numb with grief, shut him down at every turn. She insisted it was a tragic accident, that Alex was being cruel, that Joe had loved her. But Alex wasn't convinced. He began digging, and what he uncovered would change everything. Alex didn't have much to go on at first, just a gut feeling that wouldn't let him sleep. But sometimes all it takes is one crack to shatter the whole illusion. He started by searching Joe's name online, Joseph Turner. There were barely any results. No high school records, no work history, not even a real address on public record. Odd for someone who claimed to have managed bars across Georgia. Digging deeper, Alex cross-referenced Joe's phone number with online databases. That's when a first red flag popped up. The number was previously registered under a completely different name, Ethan Moore. A name tied to 2 fraud cases in Alabama and Mississippi. It snowballed from there. Over the next week, Alex uncovered 3 aliases: Joseph Turner, Ethan Moore, and a third, Jacob Keller, all linked to a string of relationships with older women, all of whom had filed complaints ranging from emotional abuse to financial theft. None of the cases had stuck. Joe had always vanished before charges were filed. Joe, or Ethan, or Jacob, depending on who you asked, wasn't just a smooth-talking bartender with a pretty smile. He was a ghost with a long trail of broken hearts and missing money behind him. Alex began tracing each alias, each town, and each woman. It was like following a string of lights that only illuminated after they'd been snuffed out. One woman, a 58-year-old retired teacher from Mobile, Alabama, had met Ethan Moore on a cruise to Cozumel. He had wooed her with salsa dancing and deep conversations about second chances. She returned home engaged in $48,000 lighter. By the time she realized he'd emptied her accounts, he was gone. Another woman, 63, from Jackson, Mississippi, met Jacob Keller through a dating app for seniors. He moved in within 3 weeks, claimed he was being sued by a former employer, and needed access to her funds just for a short time. When she started asking too many questions, he disappeared, taking her wedding ring, laptop, and car. One of the women had ever pressed charges. They were too embarrassed, too ashamed. Some didn't even tell their families. And Joe knew that. He preyed on that. But one name stood out. Karen Duvall, a 60-year-old widow from Savannah, Georgia. Unlike the others, she had tried to fight back. Alex found her through an online support group, thread titled, "I Love the Liar." In a private message, she wrote, he was calling himself Joe Turner back then, too. Said he had just moved from Miami. Ironic, huh? He told me he'd lost his parents in a car accident and had no family left. Said I reminded him of his mother's strength. I fell hard, fast, and when I found out he forged my signature to take out his second mortgage on my house, I called the cops. He was gone within 24 hours. Karen had filed a report, but again, Joe had vanished before police could act. No fingerprints, no valid ID, nothing to hold on to. He was a master at reinvention, a chameleon in khaki pants and charm. And now Alex realized his mother was just the latest in a line of women who would become Joe's next chapter. What made it worse was the pattern. Joe always studied his victims. He didn't go after just anyone. He picked women who were recently widowed, who had adult children, who lived in homes with equity and privacy. He worked slow, building trust before moving in, then speeding things up once control was established. Alex felt sick to his stomach. The same man who toasted his mother's birthday with wine and laughter had also driven another woman into bankruptcy, another into therapy. This wasn't an accident. It was a blueprint, and Sandra had been carefully and methodically chosen. Alex brought the information to the police, but without a body or a crime scene, there was little they could do. Then came the second bombshell. While going through some of his mother's documents, Alex found a revised will notarized just 2 weeks before Joe's disappearance. It left nearly all of Sandra's assets, her house, bank accounts, life insurance policy, to Joe, bypassing her children entirely. Sandra hadn't told anyone, not even her closest friend. When confronted, Sandra admitted she had changed the will. "Because he loved me," she whispered, eyes glassy. "He said he wanted to build a life, just us two. He promised to protect me until the end." Alex couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mother, normally sharp, strong, guarded, had been manipulated right into giving away everything. Alex knew gut feelings weren't enough. If he wanted answers, he needed facts, evidence. So, he didn't just hire a private investigator. He sat down with her, laid out everything he knew, and asked for one thing: prove to me I'm not crazy. Her name was Mara Caldwell, a former Miami PD detective who now ran her own discreet firm. She didn't flinch when Alex laid out the aliases, the will, the charm. She'd seen men like Joe before, narcissists with strategy. They started with the marina. Mira reviewed public dock surveillance, even checked timestamps from nearby traffic cameras. There was no footage of Joe arriving that morning. No car, no sightings, and his fishing gear still in the garage. Sandra hadn't noticed. It was tucked behind a row of boxes. Then they pulled financial records. Over the last 8 weeks, Joe had been making frequent cash withdrawals from Sandra's joint account. Nothing outrageous at first. $2,000 here, $500 there. But right before his fishing trip, a withdrawal of $8,000 had cleared. It had been taken out in Sarasota, an hour south. Alex had no idea Joe had even gone that far. Things got darker when Mira called in a favor from a friend at the Department of Motor Vehicles. Turns out Joe, under the alias Ethan Moore, had recently applied for a replacement driver's license using a Georgia address. The form was incomplete and flagged, but it suggested he was planning an exit. The last clue came from a former employee at the Miami resort where Sandra had met Joe. Mira tracked down a bartender who worked the same summer. Over a phone call, he said, "Oh yeah, Joe always had older ladies around him, so they made him feel grounded. I always thought it was weird how fast he'd move in with them." By now, Alex's instincts weren't just hunches. They were becoming undeniable truths. Joe hadn't just found his mother by chance. He had targeted her. And Alex knew whatever had happened that morning at sea, Joe had never intended to come back. I'm not a killer. I'm not that kind of person. Alex had been repeating that to himself for 3 days straight. Every time he saw his mother shuffle into the kitchen, shoulders slumped, face pale with worry, he felt like he was sinking deeper into the grave he dug with his own hands. Joe was dead because of him, because of one blow too hard, too fast, too final. He'd buried the body, told the lie, played the role. But inside, everything was cracking. The worst part wasn't the fear of getting caught. It was the look in his mother's eyes. Still hopeful, still believing, still whispering, he'll come back. Alex knew he wouldn't. If I stay silent, she'll be the one they blame. If I confess, she'll lose me too. He lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling. And when the sun rose, he got out of bed, walked to the kitchen, and picked up his phone. His hands were trembling. He dialed the number of a private investigator. A woman his friend had used to track a cheating spouse. "I'd like to hire someone," he said, "to look into a missing person." Even as the words left his mouth, they felt like glass splinters in his throat. Part of him hoped the PI would uncover everything. Another part prayed she wouldn't find a thing. He didn't know if he was trying to protect his mother or trying to protect what was left of himself. But he knew one thing. He couldn't be the only one who knew what really happened. Because sooner or later, truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. Just like the body under the oak tree, fueled by desperation and dread, Alex made one last call. He hired a private investigator. The PI went back to the marina and found no security footage of Joe ever launching a boat that morning. No witnesses, no fishing trip, nothing. And just when it felt like everything had hit a dead end, one of the neighbors, an elderly man who walked his dog past Sandra's house every day, mentioned something strange. A few days after that boy disappeared, he said, "I saw her digging in the backyard. Thought she was planting roses or something." The spot right under the oak tree where Sandra and Joe had exchanged vows 3 months earlier. Alex's stomach dropped. Alex didn't wait. He took the neighbor's tip straight to the police. At first, the officers hesitated. After all, Sandra had no prior record, no known motive, and no evidence linked her directly to foul play. But with a missing husband, a suspiciously altered will, and now a report of late-night backyard digging, the situation had changed. A search warrant was granted. That Saturday morning, squad cars rolled quietly into the cul-de-sac. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as officers set up crime scene tape around Sandra Cruz's peaceful Miami home. She stood on the porch in her robe, confused. "What's going on?" she asked, voice shaking. No one answered. Investigators walked straight to the base of the oak tree, the same one where just 3 months earlier, Joe and Sandra had stood hand in hand, exchanging vows. Now, the ground beneath it was being carefully unearthed by gloved hands and steel shovels. It didn't take long. 4 feet down, wrapped in a blue tarp and tied with nylon rope, was a decomposing male body. The smell was unmistakable. The jaw still had the faint outline of a beard. The fingers still bore a trace of fishing line. A wedding band sat loosely on the left ring finger. It was Joe. Sandra collapsed when she saw the body bag being zipped. By that evening, her front lawn was covered in reporters, cameras, and shocked neighbors. Everyone thought she was just a lonely widow looking for happiness. One woman told the news, "I never imagined this." The autopsy revealed that Joe hadn't drowned. He had been struck in the head with a blunt object, likely a hammer, and suffocated with a plastic bag, all before being buried. He was murdered in cold blood. And now the question was no longer where Joe was, but who killed him and why. All eyes turned to Sandra. Sandra was arrested that same evening, charged with second-degree murder, concealment of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. The 58-year-old woman was led out of her own home in handcuffs as news cameras flashed and neighbors whispered. Her mugshot, stunned, pale, hollow, spread like wildfire. But something didn't add up. Alex couldn't sleep. He replayed everything in his mind. The digging, the will, the lies, but deep down, something about his mother's reaction gnawed at him. She looked genuinely shocked, genuinely heartbroken. He went to visit her at the county jail the next morning. "I didn't kill him," she whispered through the glass. "Alex, I swear to you, I didn't even know he was dead. I thought he'd run away." Alex wanted to believe her. But what if she was just covering her tracks, or worse, lying to protect someone? And then the truth came crashing down. 2 days later, Alex walked into the sheriff's office with trembling hands and asked to speak to a detective. Alone in the interview room, he confessed to everything. He hadn't planned to kill him. Alex had been drinking that night. Not enough to lose control, but enough to silence the voice in his head that usually told him to walk away. He had just left his sister's house, where the conversation had turned into another shouting match about their mother. She changed the will. Alex, his sister had said, she's giving everything to that stranger. That con artist. Alex had heard enough. On the way home, he drove past his mother's house and saw the porch light still on. Joe's truck was parked outside. Something in him snapped. He parked 2 houses down and walked back in the dark. He moved like a ghost, avoiding the creaky floorboard near the front hall. The house smelled like lavender and red wine. Sandra's usual nightcap. From the hallway, he could hear faint music playing, jazz, something low and smooth. And then he saw Joe. He was in the garage alone, standing by the deep freezer, talking on the phone. Alex couldn't hear everything, but one line came through clear as a bell. Yeah, once the house sells, we're out. She's all in. Doesn't suspect a thing. Alex stood frozen, blood roaring in his ears. She's all in. Doesn't suspect a thing. He stepped into the garage, and Joe turned, startled but not scared. Smug. You shouldn't be here, Joe said, pocketing his phone. You want to talk to your mom? Do it in the morning. Alex's fists clenched. What are you doing to her? Joe smiled. That same plastic smile Alex had hated from start. Relax, man. I'm taking care of her better than you ever did. Alex's voice cracked. You're stealing her life. And then Joe said the thing that broke him. It's not stealing if she handed it over willingly. Alex didn't remember picking up the wrench. It was lying on the workbench, next to some tools. His father's tools. His real father. The one who built the damn house. The first swing was instinct. The second was fury. The third he barely remembered. When Joe hit the ground, there was silence. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just the quietest, most terrifying silence Alex had ever heard. He stood there staring at the man crumpled on the garage floor, breathing heavily, frozen. He thought of calling 911. Thought of waking his mother, but something inside him said, no one would believe you, and she would still love him more. So he cleaned up, wrapped Joe's body in the tarp Joe himself had stored for hurricane season, and then, like some bitter twist of irony, he dragged him outside to the base of the oak tree where that fake wedding had taken place. He dug, hands blistered, sweat soaking his shirt. It took hours. He didn't cry, not until the final scoop of dirt. The night before Joe's disappearance, Alex had broken into the house while Sandra was asleep. He confronted Joe in the garage, armed with a wrench and a heart full of rage. You think you can take everything, he had yelled. You think you can erase us and steal her life. Joe had laughed. He told Alex to get over it, that Sandra belonged to him now, that he was taking her to Thailand, selling the house, and leaving the past behind. Alex snapped. He struck Joe across the head once. Then again, Joe collapsed in a blind panic. Alex suffocated him with a plastic bag, wrapped the body in a tarp, and buried him under the same tree where they had exchanged vows. He chose that spot for a reason. Because it was fake, he told detectives that whole marriage was a lie. Alex never meant for his mother to be blamed. He thought the story of a boating accident would be enough. He thought the sea would swallow the secret. But secrets have a way of floating back up. Sandra sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the beige wall like it held the answers. It didn't. It hadn't for weeks since Alex's confession. The house had become a mausoleum, quiet, untouched, almost sacred in its stillness. Every corner reminded her of someone she had failed. The kitchen where she once made Joe his favorite omelet. The garage where William used to tinker with old tools. The back porch where Alex used to sit with his guitar and play softly in the evenings before everything got so complicated. She replayed the night of the murder over and over again in her mind. Not because she had witnessed it, but because she should have. She should have seen the rage in Alex's eyes. Should have known her son was unraveling, that he was desperate, terrified, and pushed too far. But she hadn't seen it. She had been too wrapped up in her own fairy tale, too eager to feel loved again, too afraid to question something that finally made her feel whole. Now, that desire had cost her everything. She hadn't been allowed to hug Alex when he confessed. They'd let her speak to him briefly at the station, but it was through a pane of scratched glass. His hands had trembled. His voice had cracked. "I'm sorry, Mom," he had whispered, and she didn't know which part of it shattered her more. His guilt or his need to be forgiven. She hadn't said anything back. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know what to say to the boy who had saved her by destroying someone else. Sandra hadn't left the house since that day. The press had moved on. The neighbors had grown silent. Her children called occasionally, but the conversations were hollow, like echoes in an abandoned church. And in the quietest hours of the night, she would sit in Alex's childhood bedroom, clutching the small photo frame that still held a picture of him at age 10, missing a front tooth, smiling with a kite in one hand and her hand in the other. She had loved too much, and that love had cost her both men she thought she'd grow old with. She remembered the day that picture was taken. Alex had just turned 10. It was a windy Saturday in spring, and she had taken him to the park by the lake, just the two of them. His older siblings had outgrown kite days, as they called them, and William had chosen to stay home and mow the lawn like he always did. But Alex had begged her, "Please, Mom, you said just us." So she packed peanut butter sandwiches and juice boxes. She remembered Alex bouncing in the front seat the whole ride there, holding the rolled-up kite like it was treasure. It was red and yellow, shaped like a dragon. He'd picked it out at a dollar store 2 weeks earlier, and had slept with it on his nightstand every night since. That afternoon, they spent hours chasing the wind. The kite would lift, spin, fall, tangle, and Alex would laugh every time, running across the grass like nothing else in the world mattered. His cheeks were pink, his sneakers got muddy, and when the dragon finally soared high into the air and stayed, he looked back at her, eyes wide with pride. "I did it, Mom," he shouted. Sandra had smiled and clapped, pretending she didn't feel tears sting her eyes. Not from sadness, but from that fleeting, perfect kind of joy only a mother knows when her child feels invincible. Later, they sat on the picnic blanket, eating sandwiches and watching the clouds move. Alex rested his head on her shoulder and asked, "Will you always be here, even when I'm big?" She had kissed his hair, always. And she meant it. Alex had been different from the others. Sensitive, quiet, easily wounded, but deeply empathetic. He was the kind of child who noticed when she skipped breakfast, who placed a note on her pillow when he heard her crying in the shower. "I love you. Don't be sad." But somewhere along the way, life got louder. William got sicker. The house grew heavier. Alex grew into a teenager who didn't talk as much. He made friends Sandra didn't like, picked up habits that worried her. They argued more. He slammed doors. She withdrew. There was a moment she could still see it. When Alex was 16, they had fought over curfew. Sandra had told him she was disappointed, and he had snapped. "All you do is miss Dad. Maybe you should have died with him." He apologized later, left a flower on her pillow, but the crack remained. She never told anyone how much that sentence hurt. Not because it was cruel, but because it was probably true. Back then, she had been sleepwalking through life. Alex had been the one trying to shake her awake. She failed to see it. And now, sitting in the same room where he once built Lego castles and read Goosebumps books under the covers, Sandra let the memory wash over her like rain on parched ground. That boy with the kite had grown into a man who killed for her. And the tragedy was not just that he did it, but that he thought she would understand. Alex Blake was sentenced to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder. Her name was Emily Blake, and for most of her life, she had played the role of the responsible child. When her father passed, it was Emily who stepped in to help Sandra manage bills and funeral arrangements. When Alex rebelled in high school, it was Emily who sat beside him during the meetings with the principal. And when Sandra announced that she was marrying a 26-year-old bartender she'd met on vacation, it was Emily who said what no one else dared to. "Mom, this isn't love. This is a scam." They hadn't spoken for nearly a month after that. Emily had always known her mother was lonely. After William's death, Sandra had lost a kind of sparkle, an invisible light that only those closest to her could see flickering. Emily had tried to get her into painting classes, encouraged her to join senior meetups, even once set her up with a sweet, balding retired dentist named Howard. But Sandra had politely declined every attempt to move forward. So when Sandra called one day and casually mentioned she'd gotten married to a man younger than Emily's own husband, Emily froze. She remembered their first meeting with Joe. It was at a backyard barbecue that Sandra hosted the week after the wedding. Joe had shown up in a linen shirt and expensive loafers, bringing a bottle of imported wine and calling Sandra darling every 3 sentences. He was smooth, too smooth, and Emily felt it in her gut. She'd cornered him near the kitchen later that day. "You know this isn't going to last, right?" she said, arms folded. Joe grinned. "If it doesn't, I'll still love her while it does." Emily never forgot the arrogance in his eyes. Then came the disappearance, the investigation, the discovery of the body, the arrest, and for a few terrifying days, Emily believed her mother was a murderer. She cried in the shower so her children wouldn't hear. She canceled meetings at work, ignored calls from friends. How do you process the idea that your own mother might have killed her husband and buried him beneath a tree? But then Alex confessed. She remembered the call from the detective. Short, clinical, almost surreal. "Your brother came voluntarily. He's taken responsibility. Your mother will be cleared." Emily didn't cry that time. She just sat down on the kitchen floor and let the silence swallow her. What followed was almost harder. Alex's trial was swift. He pled guilty, accepted the sentence without argument. Emily attended, sitting in the back row, watching her little brother in an orange jumpsuit, wrists chained, eyes hollow. After the sentencing, she visited him once. He looked older already, thinner. They sat across from each other in a cold room that smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Neither of them spoke for nearly 5 minutes. "I'm sorry," Alex said finally. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just wanted to protect her." Emily shook her head. "You didn't just protect her, Alex. You destroyed her." He blinked. "She'll be okay." "No, she won't," she whispered. "None of us will." Emily had tried to help Sandra rebuild after that. She'd offered to move her into the guest house, suggested therapy, brought over casseroles and photo albums. But Sandra always declined. Politely, distantly, like a woman speaking through glass. Eventually, Emily stopped pushing. Years later, when her own daughter asked about Grandma's story, Emily hesitated. "What do you tell a child? That your mother fell for a con man? That your brother buried him under a wedding tree? That sometimes love turns people into versions of themselves you no longer recognize?" Emily told her daughter the simplest version of the truth. Grandma had a very hard chapter in her life, but she lived through it. What she didn't say was that none of them ever truly healed. That every Thanksgiving had an empty seat. That every phone call from an unknown number still made her stomach lurch. Love hadn't just taken her mother. It had taken her family, fractured them into pieces that never quite fit back together. But still, every Sunday, Emily sent a text to her mother. "Thinking of you." And every Sunday, Sandra replied with the same 2 words. "You too." The prison smelled like bleach and metal. Sandra hadn't set foot inside a correctional facility in her entire life. She never thought she would. Not as a visitor. Certainly not as a mother. But there she was, standing in a security line, her purse in a gray bin, her shoes off, heart pounding in her ears. A guard led her down a fluorescent-lit hallway. Cold, too clean, too quiet. At the end was a visitation room, just rows of scratched plastic chairs divided by a long table bolted to the ground. Alex was already there, handcuffed, face pale. He looked up as she entered, but didn't smile. Sandra sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with everything they hadn't said. She was the first to break the silence. "They gave you 25 years. Alex nodded. "Yeah. You didn't even try to fight it." Another nod. Then softly, "I didn't want to." She studied his face, the shadows under his eyes, the slight tremble in his fingers. "Why, Alex?" He exhaled long and slow. "Because I didn't want to lie anymore. I've been lying since that night. To the cops. To myself. Even to you. You could have told me. And what would that have done?" He snapped, then immediately softened. "You would have tried to protect me. I couldn't let you carry that, too." Sandra's eyes welled. "Already carry it. Every single day." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I just wanted to scare him, make him go away, but he wouldn't stop smirking like he owned everything." She was quiet. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. His voice cracked. "Do you hate what I did?" Sandra shook her head slowly. "No. I hate what brought you to that point. I hate that I didn't see you were breaking. That I let myself be blinded." Alex swallowed hard. "Do you still love me?" he asked. Even now, Her answer didn't come immediately. She stared at him, at her son, no longer the boy with the kite or the teenager slamming doors, but a man in shackles who had done the unthinkable for her. "I never stopped," she said, "but I wish loving me hadn't hurt you so much." Alex bit his lip. His eyes glistened. "I wanted to save you, Mom." "I didn't need saving," she said. "I needed someone to tell me the truth, no matter how much it hurt." He looked away. "You were always trying to protect me," she added, "even when you were little. Remember when you used to check if the doors were locked before going to bed?" Sandra asked softly. Alex nodded faintly, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That's not your job anymore," she said, reaching across the table. She couldn't touch him. The cuffs and rules didn't allow it, but her fingers hovered near his. "Let go, Alex," she whispered. "Not of me, but of the guilt." They sat in silence for a long time after that. When the guard came to end the visit, Alex stood first. Sandra rose too. "I'll come again," she said. He shook his head. "You don't have to." "I know," she replied. "That's why I will." A letter Alex never sent. "Mom, I've written and rewritten this letter more times than I can count. Every time I think I've found the right words, I hear your voice in my head, and suddenly nothing feels worthy. I'm sorry, not just for what I did, but for all the things I never said. For the nights I watched you cry alone and didn't ask why. For the moments I saw you fading and pretended I didn't. For blaming you for things that were never your fault. I've replayed that night 1,000 times. The anger, the fear, the silence afterward. I didn't mean to kill him, Mom. But in that moment, all I saw was someone trying to take you away from me. Someone trying to erase everything you built, everything you gave. I thought I was protecting you, but I didn't protect anyone. I broke us. They tell me I'll get out someday, that I should focus on rehabilitation. But all I want is for you to have peace. If that means never seeing me again, I'll accept that. But please don't carry the weight of my choices. You've carried enough. You once told me when I was little and afraid of monsters under the bed, that love makes us brave. I believed you then. I still do. You're the bravest person I know. And I hope someday you'll remember me not as what I did, but as who I tried to be for you, with love that never changed. Jason. The courtroom was almost silent when the judge read the sentence. Sandra sat in the second row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, a tissue balled in her fist. Emily was beside her, eyes locked straight ahead, jaw tense. The words 25 years in a state correctional facility seemed to echo off the wood-paneled walls like thunder in a canyon. Alex didn't flinch. He stood tall in his wrinkled orange jumpsuit, wrist chained in front of him, face expressionless. But Sandra saw the way his fingers trembled. She knew that tremble. It was the same one he had as a boy when he broke a neighbor's window and tried to hide it from her. That same look of shame, too deep for words. The judge asked if he had anything to say before the sentencing was finalized. Alex glanced toward the gallery, toward his mother. "No excuses," he said softly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want her to live free, even if I never do again." His voice didn't crack, but Sandra's heart did. As the gavel fell, the guards moved in. Alex turned once just before being led away. Their eyes met, hers wet, tired, full of things she couldn't say. His hollow but not empty. Emily reached for her mother's hand, squeezing gently. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions no one answered. Sandra kept her head down. Emily guided her to the car. "It's over," Emily whispered. But Sandra knew better. It would never truly be over. Not for Alex, not for her, not for any of them. Only quieter. From across the street, Mr. Calvin Rhodes had watched the entire story unfold from the day Joe moved in until the police dug up the backyard. He was 78, retired, a Vietnam vet who took his coffee on the porch every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. People called him quiet, maybe even nosy, but he called it observant. And he'd observe a lot. He remembered the first time he saw Joe. Too polished, too smooth. The kind of young man who looked through people, not at them. Calvin had told his wife, "That boy ain't here for love." She just shook her head. "Don't be judgmental, Cal." But still, he noticed the patterns. Joe rarely left the house unless Sandra did. He never carried groceries, took long phone calls outside, pacing like he didn't want to be heard. And about a week before he went missing, Calvin saw something he'd never been able to forget. It was close to midnight. Joe was digging the backyard, not planting, not landscaping, digging. He had thought about calling someone, but what would he say? That a young man was gardening at night? That wasn't a crime, so he didn't. And later, when the body was found in that very spot, Calvin couldn't sleep for days. He gave a statement to the police, told them everything. They thanked him, took notes, moved on. But Calvin didn't. Every time he looked at Sandra's now empty house, he wondered what might have changed if he had spoken up sooner. If he had knocked on the door, if he had just trusted his gut. Some stories, he later told a local reporter, aren't just about who pulled the trigger. They're about all the people who heard and did nothing. He pled guilty. There was no trial, no theatrics, no dramatic courtroom breakdown, just a quiet admission of guilt and a single sentence during his hearing. I wasn't trying to be a monster. I was trying to save my mother. Sandra didn't attend the sentencing. She couldn't. After her release, she withdrew almost entirely from public life. The charges were dropped, and her name was cleared, but the damage had already been done. The media had painted her as a desperate old woman blinded by lust. The tabloids had a field day, but no one truly knew the weight she carried. She had lost her husband to cancer, her second chance at love to betrayal, and her youngest son to rage. Neighbors said she rarely left the house, that she stopped attending Sunday church and sold the backyard oak tree to be removed by professionals. She couldn't bear to look at it anymore. The house, once filled with laughter and life, became quiet. Too quiet. Years later, a local journalist tried to contact her for a follow-up story. Sandra politely declined. All she said was, "I don't want to be remembered as a woman who made a mistake. I want to be remembered as someone who loved too much and lost everything because of it. Love, money, and blood. A dangerous triangle that spiraled into tragedy. A mother searching for joy. A con man chasing wealth. And a son driven by fear and desperation. And in the end, all that remained was grief and silence." Years passed. Sandra sold the house not long after Alex's sentencing, though it took her nearly 6 months to gather the strength to pack up the memories inside it. She moved into a modest apartment on the quieter side of town, where no one knew her name or her story. She preferred it that way. She never remarried, never dated, never even let herself consider what life might have looked like if Joe had been real. If the love had been pure, the intention sincere. That dream had been buried with him beneath the oak tree, long before the professionals came to dig it up and tear it down. One day, years later, her oldest granddaughter came to visit. She was 12, curious, full of questions. "Grandma," she asked softly, "did you ever fall in love after Grandpa died?" Sandra paused. She had rehearsed a dozen answers to that question over the years, but never spoken them aloud. After a long silence, she simply said, "Yes, once." And it changed everything. That night, alone with a cup of lukewarm tea and the sound of the wind tapping at her window, Sandra opened a box from the back of her closet. Inside was the wedding band Joe had given her. Simple silver inscribed with the words, "Forever begins now." She stared at it for a long time, not with anger, not even sorrow, just a strange, quiet acceptance that some things in life don't make sense, no matter how long you try to hold on to them. She closed the box, turned out the light, and whispered to the dark, "I don't regret loving. I only regret not seeing sooner what love should never cost." If this story moved you or made you think twice about trust, love, and the choices we make, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Sandra was a victim, or did she play a role in her own heartbreak? Could Alex have chosen another path? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And as always, thank you for being here.